Root of all evil, Chapter 1. The Grey Embrace. The rain in the Grey Marches wasn't rain at all. It was a viscous green slickness, thick with the spores of the emerald overgrowth. It clung to the rusted steel of the Warsong Outriders' armor, smelled of decay and something sickeningly sweet, and coated the faces of the men in a film that made them cough. Sergeant Kalen Morian adjusted the worn leather strap of his shield, a grimace etched onto his weathered features. He hadn't seen a proper sunrise in weeks, just the perpetually bruised purple sky filtered through the suffocating canopy of the advancing blight. "Anything, Silas," he barked, his voice roughened by the constant damp and the endless repetition of the same grim observation. Silas, a young scout barely out of his teens, shifted nervously, his hand hovering over the signal horn. "Movement, Sergeant." "Roughly 50 Leaf-Thralls, moving west. Standard issue former Stormwind guards, judging by the colors. They're a-changing, aren't they?" Silas' voice was hushed, almost reverent. Kalen didn't bother to explain. Had seen it 100 times. The once familiar forms of Stormwind soldiers, farmers, even a grizzled veteran of the Sentinels, now molded into grotesque effigies of green vegetation. Their eyes were vacant, their movements jerky, driven by an instinct that wasn't their own. They advanced with a chilling serenity, their hands, still clutching rusted swords, reaching out to brush against the burgeoning vines. The border war had become a pathetic, cyclical dance of destruction. Stormwind, the proud human kingdom built on the fractured heart of the old empire, was locked in a desperate struggle against the Night Elf Sentinels, a fiercely territorial clan of Night Elves who saw the encroachment of humanity as a desecration of their ancient forests. And then there were the Warsong Outriders, a mercenary company hired by both sides, a pragmatic, if somewhat brutal, force whose only interest was survival and the hefty coin it provided. Their current directive, dictated by the increasingly frantic Lord Alaric of Stormwind, was simple: burn. Burn the trees, burn the fields, burn the Leaf-Thralls. Burn anything that offered a foothold to the emerald overgrowth. Kalen adjusted his grip on his warhammer, its head etched with a faint, glowing rune, a gift from a reclusive mage who'd sworn to protect the Grey Marches. He doubted it would be enough against a force as fundamentally twisted as the Overgrowth. Had heard tales, whispered around campfires, of the origins of the Blight, a seed, carried on the winds from the shattered lands of the Great Dark, planted long ago. They called it the Nightmare Heart. "Maintain formation," he ordered, the words heavy with resignation. "Keep the line tight. We're not here to win this battle, merely to slow the advance." Suddenly a guttural roar ripped through the air. From the dense tangle of vines, a single figure emerged, Grok Bloodfist, an Axemaster of the Bloodfang clan. Grok was a legend amongst the Orcs, a towering behemoth of muscle and scarred flesh, wielding an axe carved from black obsidian and imbued with a dark, volatile magic. He was a brutal counterpoint to Kalen's disciplined professionalism, a whirlwind of primal rage. "Humans!" Grok bellowed, his voice a rumble of stone. "Weakling pups, playing at warriors. The vines consume all." He swung his axe in a wide arc, effortlessly cleaving through several Leaf-Thralls. The axe head pulsed with heat, leaving a smoking crater in the emerald foliage. "Grok! Hold!" Kalen shouted, raising his warhammer. "We need to coordinate. We're wasting our efforts against these things." From the fringes of the skirmish, a discordant, haunting melody drifted towards them. It was Alara Silverleaf, a druid of the Night Elf Sentinels, accompanied by 2 other members of her order. Alara was an anomaly, a bridge between the warring factions, sent to observe and, if possible, find a way to truly combat the Overgrowth. Her movements were fluid, almost ethereal, as she wove a shimmering shield of interwoven vines and roots around herself. "The Overgrowth is not merely consuming," she stated, her voice carrying a note of profound sorrow. It is feeding. The corruption is rooted in this place, concentrated here. We've been fighting symptoms, not the disease. She raised her hands, chanting in the ancient tongue of her people. The air thickened with a tangible energy, and a wave of shimmering turquoise light emanated from her, washing over the advancing Leaf-Thralls. For a moment, they froze, their movements sluggish, their vacant eyes blinking with a flicker of recognition. Then, with a final agonizing shriek, they withered, collapsing into piles of decaying green flesh. It wasn't a kill. It was a reversal, a frantic, desperate attempt to unravel the corrupted pattern. Kalen watched, a seed of a possibility taking root in his mind. The elves were focused on the immediate threat, attempting to push back the relentless advance. But what if they were fighting a war within a war? The Sky Lord whispers a truth, Ilara murmured, her voice strained. The nightmare heart pulses beneath. It is rewriting the land, twisting the very essence of life. As if on cue, the ground beneath their feet shuddered. A low, resonant hum, like the beating of a colossal heart, vibrated through the earth, growing in intensity. The emerald vines writhed, thickening, and a deeper, darker green began to pulse within them. It was a horrifying revelation. They weren't just battling the overgrowth. They were battling the source of its power. And they were losing. Root of all evil, Chapter 2. The echo of the heart, the air in the Ungoro crater hung thick and cloying, not just with the humid, sickly sweetness of the emerald overgrowth, but with the metallic tang of decay and the unsettling resonance of the nightmare heart's pulse. The turquoise light from Ilara's spell had faded, leaving behind a ring of withered, crumbling Leaf-Thralls, their vacant stares a testament to the brief, desperate flicker of awareness before their final, agonizing collapse. But the advance continued, a tide of pulsating green, emboldened by the heart's rhythmic beat. Its accelerating Grondak, the Axemaster grunted, hefting his axe, its head glowing with residual magma. The enchanted stone, forged in the heart of a dormant volcano, was proving invaluable, carving paths through the overgrowth's most densely packed tendrils. The vines, they're learning. He wasn't exaggerating. The movement of the vines had become subtly coordinated, not just a chaotic surge, but a deliberate, almost intelligent pushing back against their attempts to reach the crater's center. It was like a single organism, vast and malevolent, adapting to their attacks. Kalen, the human scout, shifted uneasily, adjusting the weight of the silver-plated shield strapped to his back. Had always prided himself on his tactical mind, on understanding the flow of battle. But this was unlike anything had ever encountered. The border war, a cycle of brutal, predictable skirmishes, was governed by the limitations of men, beasts, and the terrain. This felt like fighting a dream, a nightmare given form. The incense is holding for now, he reported to Lord Valerius, a grizzled Stormwind commander, whose armor was stained with the Overgrowth's viscous sap. But it's a temporary reprieve. The spores are denser here, the heart's influence is amplifying their effects. I'm detecting increased hallucinations among the men. Some are seeing loved ones twisted and consumed by the green. Valerius, a veteran of countless battles, simply grunted, his hand instinctively resting on the pommel of his longsword. Keep them focused. Keep them fighting. Suddenly, a high-pitched keening wail pierced the air. It wasn't a sound of pain, but of profound, sorrowful recognition. Ilara, her face pale and strained, raised her hands again, her chanting intensifying. This time, a different kind of light pulsed from her, not turquoise, but a deep, mournful violet, laced with threads of emerald. The effect was immediate, but different. Instead of merely halting the advancing Leaf-Thralls, the violet light seemed to distort them. Their movements became jerky, unnervingly fluid, as if attempting to mimic the actions of their former selves, warriors, farmers, children, before the overgrowth claimed them. It was a horrific spectacle, a ghost dance of corrupted life. "The Sky Lord, he's correct," Alara gasped, her voice laced with a chilling realization. "It's not just twisting the land. It's twisting memories. It's feeding on our pain, our regrets, our fears." The ground trembled again, this time with greater force, the resonant hum of the nightmare heart escalating into a guttural thrum that vibrated in their very bone. This time, the vines reacted with devastating speed. They lashed out, tendrils thick as pythons, wrapping around the legs of the Stormwind soldiers, pulling them down with brutal efficiency. The violet light faltered, unable to hold back the onslaught. Kalen recognized the danger instantly. "It's reacting! It's trying to overwhelm us with the echoes of our own suffering." He shouted to Valerius, "We need a change of tactics. We're fighting shadows, and shadows adapt." Just then, Grondak, ignoring Kalen's command, roared and charged forward, hacking at a particularly dense cluster of vines with his magma-dipped axe. The axe cleaved through the green, releasing a plume of superheated steam that momentarily cleared the air. As the steam dissipated, a patch of the ground beneath was revealed, not rock and soil, but a grotesque, pulsating mass of roots intertwined with shards of bone and rusted metal. It was a fragment of a shattered city, a piece of Stormwind itself, consumed and reshaped by the Overgrowth. "By the ancestors!" Valerius bellowed, his hand instinctively reaching for his sword. It's feeding on the past." As the realization sank in, Alara, her eyes wide with a horrifying understanding, raised her hands one last time, this time with a desperate, almost frantic energy. "The Song of the Dryad!" she cried, launching into a complex, ancient melody. This time, the violet light wasn't a shield, but a weapon. The notes resonated with the very essence of the earth, and as the song reached its crescendo, the nightmare heart pulsed violently. A wave of shimmering emerald energy burst forth, engulfing the corrupted mass of roots, twisting it, contorting it, and then it withered. Not just the exposed roots, but the surrounding vines, collapsing in a cascade of ash. The shift was immediate. The relentless advance of the Overgrowth slowed, then stopped. The violet light weakened, but the air felt cleaner, lighter. For the first time since their arrival in the crater, they had a moment of genuine respite, a victory born of desperate intuition and fragile borrowed power. But as the last tendril of ash settled, Kalen knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was only the beginning of the nightmare. The song had merely bought them a moment, a fragile window to understand the root of their evil, and it was a root that threatened to unravel all of existence. Chapter 3, Echoes of the Seed. The silence following the Nightmare Heart's collapse was profound, a stark contrast to the shrieking, pulsing agony that had preceded it. The air, still thick with the scent of burnt emerald, hung heavy with a strange stillness, punctuated only by the ragged breaths of the three armies. Valerius, the human scout, stood rigid, his hand gripping the pommel of his broadsword, the faint scent of holy incense clinging to his tunic. Beside him, Brock Stonefist, the Orcish Axemaster, meticulously cleaned the magma-slick blade of his axe, a low rumble of satisfaction vibrating through his massive frame. Alara, the Night Elf Druid, remained motionless, her violet eyes fixed on the now inert husk of the Nightmare Heart, a tremor running through her lithe form. "It's quieter," Brock rumbled, his voice surprisingly subdued. "The whispers are gone." Valerius nodded grimly. "The Overgrowth doesn't just strangle. It listens. It absorbed the cries of our fallen soldiers, the prayers of our ancestors. It fed on the memories of Stormwind, turning them into something monstrous." He glanced at the warped, skeletal remains of what was once a Stormwind archer, now fused with thorny vines, a vacant Leaf-Thrall expression frozen on its face. "This isn't a natural disaster. This is a corruption of history." Alara finally moved, her steps deliberate and measured. The song disrupted the heart's rhythm, forced it to bloom and die before its time. But it didn't destroy the seed itself. It merely revealed its vulnerability. She knelt, examining the blackened remnants of the heart, with a reverence bordering on fear. This wasn't simply a source of corruption, it was a repository. A place where the great dark, the original source of this nightmare, attempted to re-establish itself. The song shattered the attempt, but it also scattered echoes, fragments of the dark's influence. A palpable tension filled the clearing. The violet light, now a weak ethereal glow, seemed to pulsate with residual energy, and a faint, unsettling hum resonated from the ground. Suddenly Brock roared, his axe raised. Look! Around the perimeter of the clearing, small, shimmering tendrils of emerald were beginning to sprout, thin and hesitant at first, but rapidly growing in strength. They weren't the aggressive, suffocating vines that had defined the overgrowth. These were smaller, almost delicate, pulsating with a sickly green light. "They're seedlings," Alara stated, her voice tight with alarm. "Echoes of the heart's influence, trying to reroot themselves." Valerius quickly ordered his men to establish a defensive perimeter, while Brock, with a guttural shout, began to systematically chop at the emerging vines with his axe. Alara, however, moved with a frantic urgency, chanting a different kind of song, a weaving of earth and silence, designed to suppress the nascent tendrils. "The song of binding," she explained, her brow furrowed in concentration. "It's a counter-melody designed to disrupt the echo's connection to the remaining dark energy. But it's a fragile defense. The echoes are drawn to places of concentrated emotion, particularly to those who remember the heart's corruption." As she chanted, the seedlings pulsed violently, attempting to break free from her influence. It was then they noticed the soldiers around them beginning to twitch. Their eyes glazed over, murmuring unintelligible phrases. The air thickened with a disorienting haze, laced with the intoxicating scent of the overgrowth. "Hallucinogenic spores," Valerius shouted, pulling out a handful of blessed incense and frantically burning them. The pungent smoke filled the air, momentarily warding off the effects, but it was a temporary reprieve. "We're not just fighting an overgrowth," Brock grunted, expertly dispatching a vine with a precisely aimed blow. "We're fighting memories, and the memories are hungry." Alara's voice rose above the chaotic chanting. "The song of the Dryad isn't a weapon to destroy, it's a key to understanding. The heart isn't simply a source of darkness, it's a reflection of our own. The more we fight against it, the stronger it becomes. We need to find a way to neutralize the echoes, to sever the connection before they can spread." Suddenly, a figure stumbled out of the violet haze, clutching his head, screaming. It was Silas, a human scout from Valerius' company, his eyes wide with terror. "The battle mage! He's singing! The overgrowth is him! He's feeding it!" Valerius wheeled around, his sword raised, as a young human battle mage, clad in tarnished silver armor, raised his hands and began to chant in a language older than Stormwind, a language of twisting vines and corrupted magic. The seedlings around them exploded in growth, thickening the clearing with a suffocating mass of emerald. The nightmare wasn't just returning, it was evolving. "It's learning," Alara whispered, her voice laced with a terrifying understanding. The heart didn't just corrupt the world, it corrupted knowledge. And now, it's learning how to replicate itself. Chapter 4. Echoes of the Corruption. The air thickened, heavy with the scent of burning resin and burgeoning dread. Silas' scream, a ragged burst of panic, had galvanized the ranks, but the effect was quickly countered by the relentless organic advance of the overgrowth. The battle mage, a young man named Kalen, was a whirlwind of corrupted energy, his silver armor absorbing the newly grown vines and shaping them into grasping tendrils. He moved with a chilling grace, a puppet dancing to a tune of rotten rebirth. "Break his concentration!" Valerius roared, charging forward, his broadsword a silver arc against the verdant onslaught. He slammed into Kalen, knocking him off balance, but the battle mage recovered instantly, summoning a pulsating mass of vines to ensnare Valerius' arm. The scent of sweet, cloying sap filled the air as the vines tightened, draining the warmth from his skin. Elara, her face grim, raised her hands, channeling the raw energy of the forest. The song of the Dryad wasn't a battle hymn, not entirely. It was a plea, a lament for a world choked by pain, a complex weave of sonic vibrations designed to resonate with the dormant echoes of the nightmare heart. But Kalen wasn't merely resisting, he was amplifying the song, twisting it into a horrifying parody, accelerating growth of the overgrowth with each corrupted note. "Brock, disrupt his flow," she commanded, her voice strained. "Focus your fire on the roots." Brock, a veteran Axemaster of the Warsong Outriders, understood instantly. He shifted his focus, not to attacking Kalen directly, but to the tangled web of roots beneath the clearing. He hefted his axe, the magma-infused steel gleaming with an unnatural heat, and brought it down with a precise, brutal swing. The axe bit into the roots, spewing forth not just burning wood, but shards of iridescent, pulsating energy remnants of the Nightmare Heart's influence. "The roots are laced with the corruption's essence," Brock shouted, his breath ragged. "It's not just growing, it's remembering. The pain of the lost kingdoms, the bitterness of betrayal, it's all feeding the growth." Suddenly, a deep, guttural growl echoed through the clearing. Corin, the Orcish Axemaster, a mountain of muscle and scarred steel, had broken through the thickest cluster of vines. He moved with a terrifying primal fury, his axe cleaving through the overgrowth with the force of a collapsing avalanche. He wasn't fighting to win, he was fighting to erase, to obliterate the source of the corruption with the sheer force of his being. "This is madness," Valerius yelled, struggling against the vines that constricted his arm. "It's not just about destroying the plant. It's about fighting the echo, the ghost of the thing that started it all." Elara realized he was right. The overgrowth wasn't just a biological anomaly, it was a psychic wound, a festering collection of negative emotions amplified by the Nightmare Heart's influence. "We need a focal point," she shouted over the din of battle, "something to directly confront the echo." "Silas, do you remember anything of the initial scouting reports? Anything about the heart's origin?" Silas, still pale and trembling, cautiously approached, clutching a small obsidian shard head managed to salvage from a fallen outpost. The legends spoke of a fallen star, a shard of the great dark, brought to this world by the Shadow Elves millennia ago. They say it was buried deep within the crater, and its sorrow warped the land, creating this. "The Shadow Elves," Elara murmured, a flicker of understanding in her eyes. "They weren't merely enemies, they were victims. The Nightmare Heart wasn't born of malice. It was born of loss." Just then, a low, rhythmic thrumming began to resonate through the ground, intensifying with each beat. It seemed to be emanating from the center of the clearing, from the heart itself. Kalen, bathed in the pulsating green glow, raised his hands again, his chant now a chorus of horrific beauty, drawing more of the overgrowth into existence. "He's creating a nexus," Elara screamed, "a point of focus for the echoes. We have to sever it." Valerius, finally breaking free of the vines, charged towards Kalen, determined to end the battle mage's song. But as he moved, he noticed something shifting in the surrounding clearing, not just the growth of the overgrowth, but the shadows within it. They weren't mere reflections of light, they were fractured, images of fallen soldiers, of battles long lost, of faces etched with despair. The Nightmare Heart wasn't just corrupting the physical world, it was reconstructing the past, amplifying the collective trauma of Stormwind, the Warsong Outriders, and the Night Elf Sentinels. "It's feeding on our regrets," Valerius roared, his sword flashing in the emerald gloom. "We have to stop remembering." Chapter 5, Echoes in the Green. The rhythmic thrumming of the Nightmare Heart had reached a fever pitch, shaking the very ground beneath their feet. The emerald overgrowth pulsed with a sickening vibrancy, tendrils of pulsating vines snaking out like grasping fingers, lacing themselves around the skeletal remains of the fallen Stormwind knights, Warsong, Outrider berserkers, and even the desiccated forms of Night Elf Sentinels, their once proud bows, now twisted into grotesque ornament. Kalen, now almost completely consumed by the green light, was a horrifying spectacle, his skin slick with phosphorescent sap, his eyes burning with an unnerving, ecstatic devotion. His voice, layered and distorted by the Nightmare Heart's influence, chanted a torrent of forgotten languages, a lament for a world that never was. "Has not just amplifying our regrets, has living them," Elara shouted, her voice strained against the escalating cacophony. "The echoes aren't just shadows, they're fragmented souls. We need to disrupt the connection, not just attack." She raised her staff, a gnarled branch of whisperwood, and began to weave a counterspell, a complex weaving of nature's energies, attempting to unravel the threads of the Nightmare Heart's influence. But the overgrowth responded with a sudden, violent surge, sending a wave of hallucinogenic spores billowing outwards, coating the clearing in a shimmering, nauseating haze. Valerius, battling through the intensifying spores, recognized the vulnerability. Kalen's power wasn't about raw force, it was about channeling the accumulated pain of the world. Disrupting the flow of that pain was the key. He charged, a whirlwind of steel and grim determination, forcing his way towards the battlemage. As he drew closer, he noticed something shifting in the shadows, not just the reflections of the overgrowth, but the fractured images of fallen soldiers, of battles long lost, of faces etched with despair. The Nightmare Heart wasn't just corrupting the physical world, it was reconstructing the past, amplifying the collective trauma of Stormwind, the Warsong Outriders, and the Night Elf Sentinels. "It's feeding on our regrets," Valerius roared, his sword flashing in the emerald gloom. "We have to stop remembering." Kalen, momentarily startled, faltered in his chant. The rhythmic thrumming of the Nightmare Heart stuttered, its glow momentarily dimming. This was their chance. "Elara, focus! Sever the nexus!" Valerius yelled, deflecting a tendril that lashed out from the overgrowth, narrowly avoiding crushing his shield. Elara responded, pouring her energy into the Song of the Dryad. It wasn't a forceful invocation of nature's power, but a delicate, sorrowful melody, a lament for the lost beauty, for the strangled light. As she sang, the air shimmered with the scent of pine and rain, and the surrounding trees, previously warped and twisted by the overgrowth, straightened, their branches reaching upwards with a desperate yearning. The effect was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was working. The Nightmare Heart pulsed violently, its green glow intensifying as if enraged. Kalen's chanting became a furious, frantic plea, his movements increasingly erratic. He started to unravel, his form blurring at the edges, as if the weight of the trapped souls was overwhelming him. But Valerius wasn't relying solely on Elara's song. He realized that the key wasn't just in suppressing the memories, but in redirecting them. Drawing upon the training of the Warsong Outriders, he began to channel a counter-narrative, a story of defiance, of courage, of hope. He shouted it into the clearing, a raw, primal scream forged from the shared experiences of the three armies. "Remember the victories! Remember the bonds we forged! Remember the light that still burns within us!" His voice, amplified by the sheer force of his will, clashed with Kalen's lament, creating a discordant wave of energy. The shadows within the overgrowth flickered and writhed, momentarily disoriented. The fragmented images of the fallen soldiers wavered, losing their sharp focus. Suddenly, Orcish axes, led by the unwavering Krog, the Axemaster, slammed into the core of the overgrowth. Krog, a mountain of muscle and fury, had anticipated Kalen's movements, recognizing the battlemage's reliance on the Nightmare Heart's resonance. He was carving a path through the iron-hard brambles, with enchanted magma-dipped axes, the heat generated from the axes disrupting the Overgrowth's energy flow. As the last of Kalen's chanting faded, the nightmare heart let out a final, agonizing pulse. The emerald glow sputtered and died, the Overgrowth visibly shrinking, its tendrils collapsing in on themselves. Simultaneously, Alara's song of the Dryad reached its crescendo, and a blinding flash of light erupted from the central mass of the Overgrowth. Then, as quickly as it had begun, it was over. The clearing was bathed in a serene, almost painful white light. The air cleared, the hallucinogenic spores dissipated, and the echoes of sorrow vanished. The twisted forms of the fallen soldiers were gone, replaced by pristine earth, and the three kingdoms stood united, bathed in the nascent glow of a newly born dawn. It's failing," Alara whispered, her voice filled with both relief and exhaustion. "The nightmare heart, it's starting to wither." Chapter 6. Echoes of the Unborn. The silence after the blinding flash was profound, a stark contrast to the chaotic, spore-choked reality they'd just escaped. The air, once thick with the cloying scent of decay and hallucinogenic pollen, now carried a clean, almost metallic tang. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight that pierced through the skeletal remains of the Overgrowth, illuminating a scene of breathtaking, unsettling beauty. The crater's floor, once choked by emerald vines, was revealed as a basin of obsidian rock, polished smooth by centuries of relentless growth. Krog, still sweating with exertion, hefted his magma-dipped axe, its polished head radiating a residual warmth. "Not failing," he grunted, the words gruff but laced with a cautious optimism. "Just correcting. The heart wasn't meant to build, but to consume. Now it's remembering what it's meant to be." Beside him, Alara, the Night Elf Druid, was examining the remnants of the nightmare heart. What remained was no longer a throbbing, pulsating mass, but a solidified knot of petrified emerald, like a giant, frozen tear. Her silver eyes, usually shimmering with the intensity of the forest, were clouded with a nascent understanding. The song, it wasn't merely forcing a bloom. It was forcing a death. The very essence of the heart was predicated on endless growth, a parasitic replication of life. The Dryad's essence, coupled with the weakening of its own corrupted magic, stripped away that potential. Across the clearing, Lord Theron, the Stormwind Scout, a man forged in the fires of countless skirmishes, meticulously examined a section of the twisted, charred remains of a Warsong Outrider patrol. "This is strange," he murmured, pulling out a small, leather-bound journal. The Outriders were notoriously cautious, particularly in this area. Their movements, their very postures, were dictated by the Overgrowth's influence. Yet, there's no sign of a coordinated attack, no panicked retreat. It's as if they just stopped. "The song," Alara continued, her fingers tracing the contours of the petrified heart, "broke the link. It severed the puppet strings of their minds. It was a bittersweet victory, a cleansing born from death. The initial sense of triumph, however, was tempered by a chilling observation. As the last vestiges of the Overgrowth crumbled, a subtle hum began to resonate through the crater, a faint vibration that seemed to emanate not just from the petrified heart, but from the very ground beneath their feet. "Listen," Krog said, his hand instinctively reaching for the hilt of his axe. "It's changing." The air shimmered, and a fine mist began to coalesce, swirling around them like a phantom breath. It wasn't the sickly green of the Overgrowth, but a deeper, almost violet hue. Within the mist, fragmented images flickered, not the tormented faces of the Leaf-Thralls, but glimpses of a bygone era. A majestic silverwood forest untouched by corruption. The elegant procession of elven warriors, wielding spears of polished obsidian. The thunderous charge of the Warsong Outriders, their shields emblazoned with the Storm Eagle. Even the disciplined ranks of Stormwind Knights, clad in gleaming armor. "Echoes," Alara whispered, her voice filled with a chilling realization. The heart didn't just corrupt the present, it fed on memory. It absorbed the potential of this land, twisting it into a reflection of its own twisted desires. The mist thickened, coalescing into spectral figures not solid, but shimmering outlines of warriors, archers, and mages from eras lost to time. They moved with a jerky, unsettling grace, mimicking the movements of the fallen soldiers, but with an inherent, agonizing wrongness. The nightmare heart wasn't just a source of corruption, Theron said, his hand instinctively reaching for the holy incense head distributed to his troops. It was a repository of potential nightmares. It was learning, adapting, drawing on the fears and regrets of entire civilizations. Suddenly, a spectral hand, dripping with viscous emerald ichor, reached out from the mist and brushed against Krog's arm. He recoiled with a guttural roar, slamming his axe into the ground, creating a miniature shockwave that shattered a piece of the petrified heart. More mist flooded the clearing, and the spectral figures began to coalesce, becoming more distinct, more hostile. "The song, it opened a door," Alara cried, desperately channeling her remaining energy. "We must reinforce it. We need to bind the echoes, to drown them in the essence of life." With a word, she raised her hands, and a cascade of luminous blue pollen erupted from her fingertips, swirling around the spectral figures, attempting to contain them. But it was a losing battle. The echoes, strengthened by the disruption, pulsed with renewed vigor, and a wave of chilling despair washed over them, threatening to overwhelm their senses. Krog, recognizing the shift in dynamics, charged forward, his magma-dipped axe a whirlwind of heat and fury, targeting the most prominent of the spectral figures. Theron, meanwhile, lit a dozen torches, bathing the clearing in a protective, fragrant haze, a desperate shield against the hallucinogenic effects. They had shattered the heart, but in doing so, they had unleashed something far more insidious, the echoes of a nightmare that threatened to rewrite reality itself. The clean, newly born dawn was fading, replaced by a gathering gloom, a tangible sense of dread. The root of all evil, it seemed, was not dead, merely dormant, waiting to bloom once more. Chapter 7, Echoes of the Rot. The immediate aftermath of shattering the nightmare heart was a chaos of fractured reality. The clearing, previously choked with viscous emerald tendrils, shimmered with an unsettling distortion, like looking through heat haze over a battlefield. The spectral figures, no longer simply translucent outlines, now possessed a disturbing semblance of solidity, skeletal warriors, draped in tattered finery, faces twisted in eternal screams, their eyes burning with a cold violet light. They moved with an unnerving grace, not attacking directly, but weaving through the space, amplifying the feeling of dread that hung thick in the air. Alara, drained and trembling, collapsed to her knees, her luminous pollen dispersing like dying stars. "It's feeding on our fear," she gasped, clutching her chest. The song, it was a flawed key. We touched the core, and it responded not with destruction, but with imitation. It's replicating our emotions, amplifying them, turning them against us. Krog, covered in soot and glistening with sweat, stood guard, his axe held low, constantly scanning the swirling figures. The magma coating his weapon pulsed with a sickly green light, a testament to the corrupted magic head been forced to wield. "Humans are weak to despair," he grunted, his voice a low rumble. "Elves cling to beauty, and become lost in it. We orcs fight to the death, fueled by rage. This thing understands us perfectly." Theron, ever the pragmatist, frantically fanned the fragrant haze with a broken shield, adding handfuls of dried nightshade, hoping to suppress the hallucinatory effects. "The incense is only delaying the inevitable," he admitted, wiping his brow with a soot-stained hand. "The spores are adapting, becoming resistant to its scent. We need a solution, not just a smokescreen." A new wave of spectral figures materialized, coalescing from the swirling mist. They weren't simply copies of previous figures, they were fractured, incomplete, exhibiting glimpses of Stormwind soldiers, Warsong Outrider berserkers, and even aspects of the Night Elf Sentinels. A warrior draped in shattered silver armor, a druid holding a withered branch, a sentinel's keen, sorrowful gaze. The nightmare heart wasn't merely corrupting, it was learning how to manipulate them. Suddenly, a voice, brittle and echoing, sliced through the chaos. It wasn't spoken, but formed directly in their minds, a cacophony of tormented whispers, laced with a chilling familiarity. You seek to destroy? To cleanse? You are driven by the same desires, the same weaknesses. You fight for survival, for dominion, for glory. And in the end you will only find oblivion. Sergeant Valerius, the human scout, reacted instinctively. He raised his shield, inscribed with holy runes, and let loose a torrent of iridescent incense. The effect was immediate. The spectral figures recoiled, their forms flickering as if burned by an unseen flame. But the effect was short-lived. The whispers intensified, weaving themselves into the incense's scent, twisting it into a horrifying parody of a comforting balm. It's feeding on the faith, Elara shrieked, clutching her head. The purity of the incense, magnified by our hope, is becoming its sustenance. Grog, realizing the futility of simply attacking, roared and charged, a primal fury driving him forward. He didn't target the figures directly, but instead focused on the ground beneath them, smashing his axe against the corrupted earth, sending shards of blackened stone flying. Each impact released a pulse of raw, controlled magma, and the spectral figures shrieked in agonizing unison as the heat consumed them. However, with each explosion, the clearing pulsed with greater intensity. The distortions deepened, and the air grew colder, heavier. Something new was emerging from the swirling mist, a network of intricate pulsating vines, shimmering with a sickly green light, quickly forming a cage around them. It's building a barrier, Theron shouted, desperately trying to maintain his protective haze. We're trapped. Then, a figure emerged from the center of the newly formed cage, a towering, skeletal warrior, clad in the remnants of a Stormwind banner, its silver tarnished to a horrifying black. His eyes burned with violet fire, and in his hand he held a shard of the nightmare heart, pulsing with an unnatural light. You cannot comprehend the beauty of decay, the figure boomed, his voice resonating with a chilling resonance. You strive for order, for life, but life is but a prelude to oblivion. And I, my friends, am the composer of your final symphony. He raised the shard, and the spectral figures surged forward, their movements now coordinated, unified. The fight was no longer a chaotic dance of survival, but a carefully orchestrated nightmare, a horrifying reflection of their own fears and failing. The root of all evil, it seemed, wasn't just seeking to destroy the world, it was seeking to perfect. Chapter 8, Echoes of the Unmade. The skeletal warrior, whom Theron dubbed Silas the Weaver, wasn't merely a mindless automaton. He moved with a chilling grace, a predator anticipating every twitch of their defenses. The spectral figures, once disjointed wails of agony, now flowed around him like a malevolent tide, each a reflection of a Stormwind soldier's last thought, a desperate plea for his family, a scornful rejection of his commander, a panicked recollection of his final, fatal wound. The spectacle was a psychic assault designed not just to kill, but to utterly dismantle their will. It's feeding off our fear. Lyra, the Orcish Axemaster, roared, swinging her magma-dipped axe in a furious arc. Each strike landed with a shower of incandescent sparks, but the spectral figures simply reformed, Salas' violet eyes gleaming with amusement. The incense isn't holding. The spores are weaving themselves into it. Theron, his face slick with sweat, frantically adjusted the flow of the holy incense, a pungent blend of saffron, frankincense, and pulverized dragon bone. The haze, normally a shimmering shield against the spores, was thinning, weakening, becoming iridescent with the unsettling green glow of the vines. The song of the Dryad isn't strong enough, he yelled over the din. It needs focus. Raw, untainted intent. That's when Kalen, the Night Elf Druid, stepped forward, his face etched with grim determination. He knelt before the nascent cage of vines, closing his eyes and reaching out with his senses. The air thrummed with the nightmare heart's corrupted pulse, a symphony of suffering and twisted growth. The Dryad's song, he murmured, his voice resonating with ancient magic, is not about suppression. It's about understanding. It's about reminding the land of its own potential for beauty. He began to sing, not the frantic protective melody of the Dryad, but a slow, deliberate tune, a lament woven with the rhythms of the forest. The song wasn't about stopping the nightmare, it was about guiding it. It spoke of the slow, patient cycles of decay and rebirth, of the strength found in yielding, and the eventual triumph of life over corruption. As he sang, the vines pulsed with a softer light, the green lessening, replaced by shades of jade and emerald. Silas the Weaver, momentarily thrown off balance, let out a rasping laugh. Sentimentality. A weakness you elves cling to. You cannot reason with oblivion. He raised the shard of nightmare heart higher, and the spectral figures surged again, their movements even more precise, more terrifying. Recognizing the shift, Lord Valerius, commander of the Stormwind Scouts, ordered a flanking maneuver. Axemaster Lyra, create a distraction. Focus fire on the Weaver. He raised his own sword, a masterpiece of dwarven craftsmanship, its blade humming with divine energy. Well, break this circle. Lyra charged, her magma axe carving a path through the spectral figures with brutal efficiency. The impact of the magma spat fiery sparks, momentarily disrupting the Weaver's control. But the vines responded instantly, tightening around Lyra, binding her limbs, smothering her with a suffocating green embrace. "No!" Theron cried, unleashing a blast of concentrated holy energy, disrupting the vines momentarily. He managed to wrench Lyra free, but she collapsed, gasping for breath, her skin slick with the clinging vines. "We're losing control." Suddenly, a guttural roar echoed through the clearing. Borin, a veteran Orcish Axemaster known for his strategic mind, had observed something. The song. It's not just affecting the vines. It's affecting him. He pointed toward Silas. The skeletal warrior faltered, his violet eyes flickering with confusion. The shard of nightmare heart in his hand dimmed, losing its unnatural intensity. "It's resistance," Silas stammered, his voice stripped of its chilling resonance. The spectral figures began to dissipate, their agonizing screams fading into whispers. Kalen seized the opportunity, intensifying his song. He focused his will, channeling the essence of the forest into the Dryad's melody. The cage of vines began to unravel, bursting outwards in a shower of shimmering emerald dust. Silas roared in defiance, unleashing a wave of corrupted energy. The air around them thickened with purple smoke, and the spectral figures, now stripped of their coherence, coalesced into monstrous, distorted forms, the shattered remnants of Stormwind knights, consumed by the nightmare heart's influence. But the combined assault, the holy incense, the magma axes, the song of the Dryad was overwhelming. The corrupted energy recoiled, forcing Silas back. With a final desperate surge of magic, Kalen channeled the raw power of the clearing into a focused beam of light, striking Silas directly. The skeletal warrior shrieked, his form dissolving into wisps of black smoke. The shard of nightmare heart shattered, scattering its corrupted essence across the ground. The final vestiges of the spectral figures vanished. Silence descended upon the clearing, broken only by the ragged breaths of the three armies. The cage of vines withered and died, leaving behind a scarred circle of blackened earth. The heart of all evil, it seemed, was wounded, but not destroyed. Chapter 9. Echoes of Corruption. The silence after Silas' demise was heavier than the humid air, thick with the scent of ozone and dying emerald. The three armies, exhausted and coated in a gritty film of ash and pulverized vine, stood huddled around the blackened crater's edge, a tableau of unlikely alliance. Stormwind's Captain Lyra, a woman carved from granite and righteous fury, approached Kaelin, her face grim. "The shard is broken," she stated, her voice rough. "But the residue is far more insidious than we anticipated. It's not simply corrupting, it's echoing. The memories, the pain, the intent of those consumed, they're being woven back into the very soil." Across from her, Baruch Stonehand, the Orcish Axemaster, grunted, hefting his magma-drenched axe, Ragnarok. "Feel it, then." "The earth remembers. It remembers the screams." He ran a calloused hand over the scarred ground, a flicker of something akin to sorrow crossing his face, a rare occurrence for a warrior known for his brutal efficiency. The elves, led by the stoic Elder Rowan, remained impassive, meticulously gathering samples of the shattered vines and radiating soil. "The Nightmare Heart's influence is manifesting on a cellular level," Rowan explained, his voice measured. "It's not just twisting flesh, it's rewriting the fundamental structure of life. The seedlings sprouting from this ground, they're not natural. They resonate with a cold, predatory awareness." Their initial success had been a desperate gamble, a brutal, temporary solution. The Scorch-Earth march hadn't purged the Nightmare Heart, merely weakened it. The emerald vines, though withered, still pulsed with a sickly energy, and the air shimmered with fragmented visions, glimpses of Stormwind's fall, a war cry echoing from Orcish battlefields, the mournful lament of a vanished elven forest. A chilling realization dawned on Lyra. "The border war," she said, her voice tight with apprehension. "It wasn't just a conflict born of territorial disputes. It was a deliberate orchestration, fueling the Nightmare Heart's growth. The fires, they weren't clearing space. They were feeding it." The decision was made swiftly, driven by a shared urgency. The immediate task was containment. Rowan, utilizing his knowledge of ancient druidic practices, began to construct a protective barrier, not of stone or steel, but of interwoven, purified roots, drawing upon the lingering strength of the revitalized earth. The roots glowed with a soft, protective luminescence, battling the encroaching emerald tendrils. Meanwhile, Baruch and his axe-wielding clan, utilizing their mastery of earth magic, began to carve a network of trenches around the crater, channeling water, purified by Stormwind's blessed incense, to create a moisture barrier, a desperate attempt to starve the rapidly spreading vines. The magma axes, imbued with the essence of volcanic fire, were used sparingly, only to scorch the most virulent growths. But with each stroke, the echoes of the corrupted memories intensified, manifesting as phantom sounds, the clang of steel, the cries of dying men. Lyra, ever the pragmatic leader, oversaw the construction of a fortified encampment within the clearing, utilizing salvaged materials from the ravaged lands and the ingenuity of her storm-forged engineers. The holy incense burned continuously, creating a protective bubble around the camp, not just shielding against the hallucinogenic spores, but also actively suppressing the lingering psychic resonance. As night fell, a new, unsettling phenomenon emerged. Small, iridescent blossoms, radiating an unnatural light, began to sprout amongst the blackened earth. They were beautiful, terrifyingly so, their petals unfurling in slow, hypnotic movements, attracting swarms of iridescent insects that pulsed with a faint emerald light. "The heart is imprinting itself onto new life," Rowan murmured, his face etched with concern. "It's attempting to create a new ecosystem, one entirely devoted to its survival." Suddenly, a piercing shriek cut through the night. A young Stormwind scout, barely more than a boy, stumbled from the shadows, clutching his head. "They're speaking to me," he cried, his eyes wide with terror. "They're telling me to fight, to burn. They say the elves are liars, and the orcs are weak." The fragmented voices, a cacophony of corrupted memories, surged around them, threatening to overwhelm the defenses. Celeste's legacy had not been erased, it had become an active, insidious component of the Nightmare Heart's influence. Burrock roared, swinging Ragnarok wildly, attempting to crush the source of the disturbance. But it was futile. The voices didn't originate from a single entity, they were woven into the fabric of the infected land itself. Lyra stepped forward, raising her hand, channeling the power of the blessed incense. "We cannot defeat it with force alone," she declared, her voice resolute. "We must understand it. We must unravel its twisted song." The fate of their world, it seemed, hinged not on destruction, but on the delicate art of silencing a nightmare born from the echoes of forgotten wars. Chapter 10. The Weaver's silence, the stench of burnt flesh and emerald rot, hung heavy in the air, a grim perfume of desperation. The initial, chaotic surge of voices had subsided, leaving a dull, persistent hum beneath Rowan's thoughts, the nightmare heart's insidious whisper. The scout, Elias, still huddled near the edge of the clearing, shivering not just from cold, but from the lingering echoes of the voices. He hadn't spoken since, his eyes vacant, occasionally flicking with a disconcerting, unsettling recognition. "It's not a single voice, Silas," the ancient druid and Rowan's mentor rasped, leaning heavily on his staff. "It's a tapestry, woven from the regrets, the ambitions, the hatred of every soldier who's ever fallen on this ground. The heart isn't just corrupting, it's collecting, absorbing the very essence of conflict." Burrock, the Orcish Axemaster, grunted in agreement, meticulously cleaning the magma-stained blade of Ragnarok. "Waste of time, this talk of understanding. We smash it. That's the only language the greenskins speak." He hefted the axe, the heat radiating from the infused magma, momentarily distorting the air. Lyra, the Night Elf Druid, remained impassive, her violet eyes scanning the encroaching vine. "Silas is right. Direct confrontation will only feed the heart's hunger. We need a different kind of blow, a disruption of its foundation." She meticulously lit a small silver brazier, the fragrant smoke of blessed incense curling upwards, pushing back the oppressive scent of decay. The incense disrupts the auditory aspect of its influence. It's a fragile shield, but it's all we have against the immediate sensory assault. The decision was made with a grim urgency. They wouldn't continue the futile border war. They wouldn't add another layer of scorched earth to the planet's wounds. Instead, a desperate unified assault was planned, a Scorch-Earth march directly to the Nightmare Heart's pulsating core within the Ungoro crater. The Stormwind contingent, a regiment of seasoned scouts and archers, shifted into formation. Captain Valerius, a veteran scarred by countless battles against the Orcs, barked orders, his voice tight with controlled fury. "Shields up! Maintain formation! And keep those fires burning! We need to carve a path." The Orcs, a brutal wave of muscle and steel, moved with a terrifying grace, their movements honed by generations of brutal warfare. Burrock, a towering figure clad in scarred obsidian armor, took the lead, Ragnarok singing a deadly song as he cleaved through the encroaching vines. The magma-infused axe seemed to revel in the task, carving channels of blackened earth and releasing plumes of incandescent ash. The elves, a silent, ethereal presence, formed a protective cordon around the flanks. Lyra, guided by an instinctive connection to the land, was attempting to amplify her efforts, drawing upon the dwindling power of the ancient Dryad song. The song, a melody of interwoven notes, intended to soothe and encourage growth, was being channeled into a focused beam, a desperate attempt to force the Nightmare Heart to bloom prematurely, a chaotic, destructive flowering that might weaken its grip on the surrounding land. "The Dryad's song is struggling," Rowan observed, his brow furrowed in concentration. "The heart is resisting. It's feeding on the sound, twisting it into a mockery of life. It's fighting back." As they advanced, the ground beneath them became increasingly treacherous. The vines, no longer simple tendrils, had grown into monstrous sentient constructs, thick, iron-hard brambles, studded with thorny barbs, animated by the nightmare heart's will. They snapped and writhed, attempting to ensnare the advancing troops. Boruk and his axe brothers moved with brutal efficiency, each swing of Ragnarok capable of shattering stone and obliterating entire swaths of the nightmare heart's influence. Yet, the brambles reformed, quicker and stronger than before. The more they destroyed, the more aggressively the vines responded, like a wound refusing to heal. Suddenly, a Leaf-Thrall, a former Stormwind soldier, eyes vacant, limbs jerky, lunged from behind a thicket wielding a crude, sharpened branch. Elias, seemingly roused from his stupor, reacted instinctively, throwing himself in front of the attacker, taking the blow meant for Boruk. "Elias!" Valerius roared, drawing his blade. The scout, wounded but alive, collapsed, clutching his side. Lyra, witnessing the near disaster, channeled all her remaining power into the Dryad's song. This time, instead of a gentle coaxing, she unleashed a torrent of raw, resonant energy. The song became a wave, washing over the clearing, and the nightmare heart pulsed violently, emitting a blinding flash of emerald light. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Then, the heart began to bloom, not a graceful unfolding, but a grotesque, cancerous eruption. Giant, pulsating blossoms, each one the size of a small cart, burst forth from the infected earth, dripping with a viscous, glowing sap. But instead of life, they radiated a searing heat, and as they withered, they crumbled to ash, releasing a cloud of hallucinogenic spores. Valerius, already affected by the spores, staggered, his vision blurring. "The incense, it's not enough!" he shouted, his voice laced with panic. Boruk, shielded by the remaining orcs, pressed forward, using Ragnarok to carve a path through the collapsing blossoms, creating a channel toward the crater's core. Rowan, analyzing the situation, realized something crucial. "It's not the spores themselves that are poisoning us," he exclaimed, his voice strained with urgency. "It's the memory they trigger. The heart is feeding on our past regrets, amplifying our fears, turning us against each other." He raised his hands, focusing his energy, attempting to weave a countersong, a melody of remembrance, of acceptance, of forgiveness. It was a desperate, instinctive act, a prayer to silence the nightmare heart's insidious whispers. The effect was immediate. The orcs hesitated, their movements slowing, the blue haze in their eyes lessening. Even Elias, still clutching his wound, seemed to calm, the fragmented voices receding. As the last of the blossoms withered, a collective gasp swept through the assembled forces. Before them, at the heart of the Ungoro crater, pulsed the nightmare heart, a colossal, emerald seed radiating malevolent energy. It wasn't a terrifying behemoth of corruption, but a small, vulnerable thing, exposed and weakened. It looked lonely. In that moment of unity, forged in desperation, and fueled by a shared understanding, the three kingdoms stood together, ready to deliver the final decisive blow. Chapter 11. The Bloom of Reconciliation. The air in the Ungoro crater was thick, not just with the choking spores of the emerald overgrowth, but with a strange palpable tension. The scent of burnt blossoms, once acrid and sickening, now carried a faint, metallic tang, the residue of the incense Elias' men had painstakingly burned, shielding them from the worst of the hallucinogenic effects. The blue haze that had choked their vision, the cacophony of fragmented memories and whispered anxieties, had receded, leaving a disconcerting quiet in its wake. Elias, the human scout, felt a profound shift. The agonizing echo of his father's final words, "Forgive them, Elias, for they know not what they do," that had driven him onward with such desperate ferocity, had softened, resolving into a simple, aching regret. He lowered his shield, the polished steel reflecting the unsettling emerald glow of the nightmare heart. "It's quieter," he said, his voice hoarse but steady. The voices are fading, almost like the echo of a dream. Baruch, the Orcish Axemaster, grunted, his massive frame still radiating contained rage. He adjusted Ragnarok, the magma-dipped axe, its head shimmering with an unsettling heat. Weakening the beast, then, he stated, his voice a rumbling baritone. But a wounded beast still bites. He glanced at the assembled Stormwind warriors, a contingent of hardened veterans now moving with a cautious grace, their faces etched with a newfound humility. The border war, so brutal and senseless, felt increasingly absurd, viewed through the lens of this horrific, shared nightmare. Rowan, the Night Elf Druid, stood apart, his silver eyes fixed on the nightmare heart. He hadn't uttered a single word since their unified decision, but his presence was a tangible force, a calming current amidst the chaos. He raised his hands, his fingers tracing intricate patterns in the air, not weaving a spell of destruction, but a resonant harmony. The Song of the Dryad, as he called it, wasn't a battle hymn, but a lament, a plea for understanding. It began as a high, crystalline note, layered with the whispers of ancient forests and the murmur of forgotten rivers. As he sang, the nightmare heart pulsed with a brighter, more erratic rhythm. The emerald glow intensified, not with malice, but with a strange, almost desperate yearning. The air shimmered, and the spores, instead of clinging to the soldiers, began to drift away, drawn towards the melody like moths to a flame. Suddenly, a wave of images flooded Elias' mind. Not the terrifying visions of loss and vengeance that had driven him, but glimpses of the nightmare heart's genesis. He saw a primordial seed, radiating a potent, untamed magic, nurtured by the lingering echoes of a long-dead god of decay. He saw the dark's influence, a parasitic hunger for chaos and oblivion, twisting this raw power, corrupting it, transforming it into this monstrous, sentient bloom. "It's not evil fundamentally," Elias gasped, stumbling backward slightly. "It's lost. It's searching for something it can't comprehend." Baruch, witnessing this, lowered Ragnarok slightly. "Lost? A corrupted seed is still a threat," he grumbled, but the edge had gone from his voice. He understood now. This wasn't simply about eradicating a monster, it was about confronting a wound in the very fabric of reality. Rowan's song intensified, now laced with a subtle pulsating rhythm, borrowed from the heartbeat of the earth. As the final notes resonated, the nightmare heart shuddered violently. The emerald glow flared white, then fractured into 1,000 shimmering shards that exploded outwards, not with destructive force, but with a wave of pure cleansing energy. The vines surrounding the crater began to wither, not with a violent collapse, but with a graceful, slow surrender. They turned to dust, drifting upwards like silent snowflakes, carried on the breeze. The air cleared completely, revealing the raw, scarred rock of the Ungoro crater, a place once choked by an unnatural jungle, now a patch of pristine earth. But something else happened. As the last vestiges of the overgrowth vanished, a small, fragile seedling, resembling a tiny silver fern, pushed its way through the newly cleansed soil near the base of the diminished nightmare heart. It unfolded slowly, revealing delicate, luminescent leaves that pulsed with a gentle, emerald light. "It's responding," Rowan whispered, his voice filled with awe. "It's attempting to heal itself." Elias approached the seedling cautiously, drawn by an irresistible force. He knelt beside it, extending a hand. As his fingers brushed against a leaf, he felt a surge of energy, not threatening or overwhelming, but warm and comforting, a sense of profound peace. "It's remembering," he said, his eyes glistening. "It's remembering what it was meant to be." The Stormwind warriors, the Warsong Outriders, the Night Elf Sentinels, all stood united around the seedling, a silent testament to the improbable alliance forged in the heart of a nightmare. They had not merely vanquished a monster, they had sown the seeds of a new beginning, a fragile bloom of reconciliation, in a world strangled by fear and fueled by endless war. The root of all evil, it seemed, might also hold the key to a new, verdant future. Chapter 12 echoes in the green the air around the seedling, which Rowan had tentatively named Viridian, shimmered with residual magic. The initial euphoria of victory, the roaring cheers of exhausted soldiers, had subsided, replaced by a contemplative quiet. The three armies, still clad in the grime of battle and bearing the scars of their desperate march, stood in a loose circle around the nascent fern, a potent symbol of their unlikely unity. King Theron of Stormwind, his face etched with weariness but radiating a quiet resolve, broke the silence. "The council demands an explanation," he said, his voice carrying a surprising gentleness. "They will undoubtedly want to dissect this miracle, to understand how such a thing could emerge from the heart's corruption." "I believe," Elias countered, his hand still resting lightly on the leaf of Viridian, "that understanding comes not from dissection, but from acceptance. We have spent centuries warring over this land, fueled by fear and dogma. This seedling, it's a plea for something different." The gruff voice of Borak Stonefist, the war chief of the Warsong Outriders, cut through the debate. "Don't get lost in fancy words, Elf. This thing's a sign. The heart was a festering wound, twisting the world. This is a chance to heal it. But we can't let the elves hoard it. The humans need this as much as we do, perhaps more." Theron inclined his head, acknowledging the pragmatic concern. "Borak speaks a truth. But the elves understand the delicate nature of the magic here. They've been studying the Overgrowth's influence on the land's essence, attempting to translate its corrupting power into a restorative force. We need their guidance." The decision was made swiftly, spurred by a shared urgency. A detachment of Stormwind mages, led by the venerable Master Alatar, began to establish a protective perimeter around Viridian. They constructed a barrier of shimmering, silver light, woven with fragments of holy incense, the scent clinging to the air, strangely calming amidst the lingering scent of decay. Meanwhile, Borak directed his Axemasters to reinforce the crater's rim, carving a deeper defensive line, this time not with the intent of creating a firebreak, but to shield the seedling from errant magics, or potentially from the lingering tendrils of a nightmare heart. He recognized the raw primal power contained within Viridian, a power that could burn just as easily as it could heal. Rowan, guided by the elves' teachings, began to meticulously document Viridian's growth. He recorded its slow, deliberate unfurling, the changing shade of its luminescent leaves, the subtle shifts in the energy it emitted. He realized the song of the Dryad hadn't merely caused the heart to bloom, it had imprinted a memory, a blueprint for restoration, onto the very seed. "It's not simply replicating a fern," Rowan explained, his voice filled with wonder. "It's accessing a primal memory of the land's potential. A perfect green, untouched by corruption." As night fell, casting long, skeletal shadows across the crater floor, a different kind of observation began. From a concealed vantage point, a small group of Night Elf Sentinels, led by Lyra Moonwhisper, a young druid renowned for her empathic connection to the land, began to commune with Viridian. They didn't use spells, but rather channeled their own life force, weaving patterns of compassion and renewal. "The heart's influence still clings to it," Lyra reported, her voice hushed. "It's fighting against its own nature, battling the echoes of the Overgrowth. It needs reassurance. It needs to understand that it is not alone." Suddenly, the ground trembled. A low, guttural growl echoed across the crater, rising from the depths of the disturbed earth. A tendril of the nightmare heart's influence, a sickly, pulsating vine, snaked upwards, attempting to reclaim its territory. "Oh, do, Borak roared, ordering his Axemasters to unleash a barrage of magma-dipped axes, the enchanted blades burning with molten energy. But this time, the attack wasn't aimed at destruction. Instead, they focused the heat directly onto the encroaching vine, not to obliterate it, but to cauterize its corrupting energy. As the flames met the vine, a remarkable thing occurred. Instead of a destructive explosion, the vine shuddered, recoiled, and began to shrink. Its sickly green hue faded, replaced by a dull, grayish white. "It's responding to the healing," Elias shouted, his face alight with excitement. "The seedling's energy is disrupting the heart's ability to corrupt." The combined efforts of the three armies, the mages shielding with incense, the Axemasters channeling heat, the druids offering solace, created a resonant wave of restoration. Viridian pulsed with vibrant emerald light, and the small seedling seemed to visibly grow, its leaves unfurling with a breathtaking speed. A palpable sense of hope, fragile yet powerful, filled the crater. The echoes of the nightmare were fading, replaced by the nascent melody of a verdant rebirth. Chapter 13. The seedling's response. The tremors subsided, leaving a silence thick with anticipation, broken only by the crackling of the remaining flames and the rhythmic chant of the elven druids. Borat, his face smeared with soot and the scent of burnt earth, adjusted the grip on his magma-dipped axe, a low rumble of satisfaction vibrating in his chest. "Continue the focused heat," he commanded, his voice a gravelly rasp, honed by years of battlefield fury. "Don't let it recover its bite." Elias, the human scout, a wiry figure, perpetually dusted with incense smoke, frantically scribbled notes in his leather-bound journal, a manic energy radiating from it. "The fluctuations are extraordinary. The spectral readings are off the charts. It's not simply resisting, it's acknowledging the presence of life. The heart's core programming, the relentless drive to corrupt, is being momentarily overridden." The Night Elf Druid, Lyra, knelt beside the now pulsing seedling. Her silver eyes, normally shimmering with a cool, detached wisdom, were alight with an almost unnerving intensity. She reached out a hand, her fingers trailing over the delicate new leaves, murmuring in the ancient tongue of the Dryads. "It remembers a feeling, not of malice, not of domination, but of vulnerability. It felt the warmth, the intention. It understands, dimly, that it was not alone." Suddenly the ground trembled again, but this time it was a slower, deeper vibration, resonating through their bones. A far more substantial tendril of the Nightmare Heart's influence erupted from the crater floor, thicker than anything they had seen before, a writhing mass of emerald vines tipped with pulsating, sickly white blossoms. It wasn't an aggressive attack, not overtly, but a desperate, grasping tendril, seeking to re-establish control. Panic threatened to flare in Borik's eyes. "Hold the line!" he roared, hefting his axe and leading a flanking maneuver. The Orcish Axemasters, a disciplined wall of muscle and fury, unleashed a torrent of magma-dipped axes, the enchanted blades singing with heat. But this time the effect was muted. The heat, carefully focused, merely seemed to repel the tendril, forcing it to twist and recoil like a serpent struck with a hot brand. "It's adapting!" Elias shouted, his voice strained. "The heart is learning. It's attempting to shield itself with a defensive aura of corrupted growth." Lyra, her face etched with concentration, raised her hands, chanting the song of the Dryad with renewed vigor. The air shimmered, and the melodic notes, interwoven with the scent of rain and ancient earth, intensified. The seedling responded instantly, its light growing brighter, its growth accelerating to an almost impossible rate. Vines erupted from its base, spiraling upwards, intertwining with the roots of the surrounding trees, not to strangle, but to nurture, to weave a protective lattice of vibrant green. As the song reached its crescendo, the enormous tendril recoiled violently, screeching a sound that was less physical than a jarring disruption of reality, and began to unravel. The sickly white blossoms withered and crumbled to ash, and the vine itself shrunk, contracting inwards, its corrupted energy visibly diminishing. "The resonance, it's amplifying!" Elias yelled, frantically adjusting the concentration of the incense, creating a denser shield around the troop. "We're feeding the seedlings energy." But this time, something different happened. As the tendril weakened, it didn't simply die. Instead, it pulsed with a strange iridescent light, mirroring the vibrant green of the seedling. Then, slowly, unbelievably, it began downwind. The corrupted vines loosened their grip on the surrounding trees, releasing a wave of restored life. Dead leaves unfurled, blossoms blossomed, and the air, thick with the scent of decay, began to sweeten with the fragrance of nascent spring. Borak lowered his axe, a rare expression of wonder flickering across his scarred face. "It's healing the land." Lyra, her eyes closed, breathed deeply. "It's remembering what it means to be alive. The heart, it's not inherently evil. It's a memory, warped and twisted by the great dark. And we are reminding it of its origins." As the final vestiges of the tendril dissolved into glittering dust, a collective gasp rose from the assembled armies. The crater, once a scene of unrelenting horror, was transforming. The nightmare heart, though still pulsing with a faint, corrupted energy, was no longer a dominant force. The overgrowth, instead of a relentless, suffocating tide, had begun to recede, replaced by a burgeoning patch of healthy vegetation, the first sign of true, untainted life in generations. The air, thick with the scent of herbs and damp earth, felt clean, and for the first time, a fragile sense of hope bloomed amidst the devastation. The nightmare, it seemed, was truly beginning to fade. Chapter 14. The Echo of Green the Silence. After the heart's collapse was profound, broken only by the ragged breaths of the three armies and the drip, 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 drip of dissolving sap from the monstrous vine. Dust, iridescent with residual magical energy, coated everything. Borak's scarred face, Lyra's silver-threaded tunic, the polished steel of Captain Theron's breastplate. The air, previously choked with the sickly sweetness of decay, now carried a tentative, almost painful, fragrance of life, rain-soaked earth, burgeoning moss, and the first hesitant bloom of a purple nightshade. "It's beautiful," murmured Theron, the Stormwind captain, a man built of granite and unwavering duty, a rare note of awe in his voice. He gestured towards the crater's center, now a swirling vortex of green and gray. The tendrils remains rapidly coalescing into a patch of vibrant, impossibly healthy foliage. A miracle. Borak, the Orcish Axemaster, remained unusually still, his massive frame slumped slightly. The earlier rage that had fueled his attacks, the guttural snarls born of a brutal instinctual hatred, had vanished. He examined a small, newly unfurled fern with a meticulousness that seemed utterly foreign to his kind. The dark, it didn't just corrupt. It stole. It stole a memory of growth. Lyra, the Night Elf Druid, stepped forward, her movements fluid and graceful despite the chaotic aftermath. She began to chant, a low, resonant song woven from the ancient tongue of her people. It wasn't a spell of destruction, as had been her intention at the heart's core. Instead, it was a song of resonance, a lament for the lost potential, and a tentative invitation to the burgeoning life. As she sang, the patches of healthy vegetation around them expanded, drawing the iridescent dust from the collapsing tendrils and weaving it into their growth. "The song of the Dryad," she explained, her voice laced with a quiet understanding. "It's not about forcing growth. It's about awakening the echoes of creation, the inherent desire to flourish that exists within all things touched by the great dark." The transformation wasn't instantaneous. The crater remained scarred, a testament to the horror they'd faced. But with each pulse of Lyra's song, with each careful touch of Borak's hand tending to the newly revived saplings, and with the strategic deployment of Theron's incense, the holy resins, infused with the blessing of Stormwind sky gods, creating a shimmering protective shield against the residual hallucinogenic spores. The effect deep. Suddenly, a tremor ran through the ground. Not a destructive quake, but a gentle rhythmic vibration, like a heartbeat. From the revitalized patch of greenery, a single perfect bloom emerged, a scarlet poppy, strikingly vibrant against the deep green. It pulsed with a faint inner light, mirroring the iridescent dust still swirling in the air. "Look!" cried Theron, instinctively raising his sword. But Lyra held up a hand, silencing him. "Don't. Dite. It's reacting. The heart it's answering." As if in response to Lyra's intent, a deeper pulse emanated from the heart itself, a slow, deliberate rhythm, less frantic than before. The corrupted energy, still visible as a faint gray haze, began to coalesce, shifting from a choking mass to a central, concentrated point. It wasn't a malevolent surge, but a tentative reaching, an attempt to understand. Then, from the core of the heart, a tiny, iridescent seedling sprouted. It was no larger than a thumb, its leaves a delicate shade of emerald, and it shimmered with the same otherworldly light as the poppy. "It's replicating," gasped Borak, his initial wonder returning with a sharp, instinctive understanding. The dark tried to destroy life. Now, life is fighting back, creating echoes. The implications of this discovery hit the three commanders with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't merely about destroying the nightmare heart, it was about a fundamental shift in the planet's very fabric. The corrupted magic, born of the great dark, was not simply being purged, it was being transformed, repurposed. "Theron, prepare a perimeter," commanded Theron, his voice regaining its martial edge. "We don't know what this echo will do, but we must contain it, protect it." Lyra, however, wasn't focused on containment. She knelt beside the seedling, extending a hand, her fingers hovering just above its delicate leaves. "It needs nurturing," she whispered. "It needs the memory of sunlight, of rain, of connection." As her hand brushed against the seedling, a wave of energy rippled outwards, carrying with it a scent of freshly turned earth and the murmur of unseen growth. The remaining tendrils of the nightmare heart shuddered, releasing a final burst of iridescent dust that dissipated into the air, leaving behind only the vibrant green of the burgeoning light. The root of all evil, it seemed, had begun to grow a counter-root. And in the heart of the strangulated world, the first fragile shoots of hope, born from the ashes of nightmare, had finally taken hold. Chapter 15. The Harvest of Shadows. The air in the Ungoro crater hung thick and heavy, saturated with the cloying sweetness of the emerald overgrowth's tendrils. It wasn't the unpleasant stench of decay that choked the nostrils, but something deeper, older, the ghost of a corrupted bloom. The scouts, initially a ragged scouting party of Stormwind's elite, had been reduced to a disciplined column, their armor gleaming with a disconcerting, jade-tinged sheen. What? Beside them, the Axemasters of the Warsong clan, a brutal, almost unsettlingly silent force, moved with a predatory grace, their magma-dipped axes radiating a faint, pulsing heat. And flanking them, the Night Elf Sentinels, their silver armor blending seamlessly with the shadows, radiated an aura of watchful stillness. The initial wonder Borak had experienced now curdled into a grim determination. Theron, the Stormwind commander, a man forged from steel and tempered by lost barked orders with a clipped precision, his hand never straying far from the pommel of his warhammer. "Keep the line tight. We don't know what's waiting in those vines." He gestured towards the monstrous, pulsating growth that dominated the crater floor, a vast, undulating sea of emerald and jade. "Remember the scout's report. The overgrowth isn't just consuming, it's learning." Lyra, ever the enigma, continued her quiet communion with the nascent seedling. It pulsed with a light not entirely natural, a luminescence that mirrored the verdant chaos around them. The echo Shed felt was more than just energy. It was a feeling, a desperate yearning for wholeness, for the lost song of the world. She wasn't trying to control it, but to gently encourage it, whispering ancient elven lullabies learned from the memory of the first forests. "The spores are intensifying," reported Kalen, the sentinel leader, his voice hushed and laced with concern. "Leaf-Thralls, dozens of them, emerging from the vines. They're docile, but their eyes, they hold no recognition, no memory. Just a vacant hunger." A wave of the hallucinogenic spores, shimmering with iridescent particles, washed over the column. Several Stormwind soldiers collapsed, clutching their heads, writhing in silent agony. Theron swiftly deployed the specially crafted incense burners, the fragrant smoke billowing outwards, creating a shimmering protective bubble around the unit. The holy herbs, blessed by the Stormwind clergy, burned with a blue flame, suppressing the worst of the spore's influence. "Hold the line!" Theron roared, his voice cutting through the chaos. "The incense shields us, but it's a temporary measure. We need to disrupt the Overgrowth's core." That's when the Orcs began their advance. Gromek, the Axemaster who had first identified the Nightmare Heart's pulsating energy, leading the vanguard. His axe, named Stonebreaker, was an obscene marvel, a polished obsidian head perpetually wreathed in flickering magma, a byproduct of the ancient craft. Each swing was a cataclysm, the heat instantly cauterizing the dense vines, turning the monstrous foliage into brittle charcoal. "It resists," Gromek grunted, pausing to wipe the sweat and soot from his face. "This isn't a simple plant. This thing, it remembers. It's fighting us with its own growth." As the Axemasters carved a ragged path, the Elves moved to support them. Lyra, guided by an instinct older than language, began to perform the Song of the Dryad, a melody of interwoven harmonies, drawing upon the dormant magic of the earth. The notes resonated with the Overgrowth's strange energy, a discordant counterpoint to the destructive force of the axes. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the vines began to retract, shrinking back from the advancing troops, as if resisting a painful cure. "The song, it's working!" gasped Eloin, a young sentinel whose face was etched with disbelief. "The Nightmare Heart, it's reacting!" The effect was immediate. The pulsating throb of the Nightmare Heart intensified, escalating into a violent shudder. The iridescent dust, released in a chaotic spray, swirled around the crater, momentarily blinding. "But amidst the chaos," Lyra continued to sing, her voice growing stronger, more confident, channeling the nascent life force feeding into the seedling. Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled. A massive bloom erupted from the heart of the Nightmare Heart, not the sickly parasitic growth they had expected, but a flower of impossible beauty, a single, colossal blossom of purest white, radiating an intense, almost painful light. As the petals unfurled, they withered and crumbled, dissolving into ash. The transformation was agonizingly swift. The remaining tendrils of the Overgrowth shrieked in silent agony, their vibrant green fading to a dull, lifeless gray. The Leaf-Thralls, stripped of their connection to the nightmare, collapsed to the ground, their vacant eyes glazed with confusion. Standing in the center of the newly cleared space, the three armies, exhausted and battered but united by this shared victory, felt a strange sense of peace. The air, still heavy with the scent of ash, was now imbued with the promise of renewal. The seedling, now bathed in the blossom's fleeting light, pulsed with an even brighter, more vibrant glow. "We've done it," Theron said, his voice hoarse but filled with a palpable sense of triumph. "We've shattered the nightmare." But as the last traces of the Overgrowth dissipated, a new, unsettling realization dawned upon them. The single white blossom had not simply destroyed the Nightmare Heart. It had become it. And within its decaying petals, a single, tiny seed lay dormant, waiting to begin anew.